Once upon a time in a big boarding school, there was a mean and a wicked mathematics teacher. Her name was Mrs. Koi Koi. She had a red shiny shoe that made a koi koi sound whenever she walks. The students called her Mrs. Koi Koi because of those noisy shoes. Mrs. Koi Koi was the scariest teacher in the whole school. She was strict and loved to punish students. If you were late to class, she would make you kneel for hours. If you didn't understand her math lesson, she would yell at you and beat you with a big cane. No one dared to talk back at Mrs. Koi Koi. Not even the other teachers. They were too afraid of her. One morning during the assembly, a group of students came late. Mrs. Koi Koi eyes flashed with anger when she saw them sneaking into the assembly ground. "You there, come here now," she shouted. The students were trembling as they walked towards her. "You think you can come late and get away with it?" she hissed, pulling out her long cane without wasting time for an explanation. She made them kneel down and flogged them so badly. The other students watched in fears as Mrs. Koi Koi struck again and again. The latecomer could only cry, but no one dared to help them. That night, those students Mrs. Koi Koi flogged gathered in secret. They were tired of Mrs. Koi Koi's wickedness and bullying. "We have to teach her a lesson," one of the boys said. His face was still swollen from the floggings. "Yes, but how?" another asked. "We would wait for her after school tomorrow. Then we will show her that she can't treat us like this anymore," the leaders of the group whispered. His voice was low but firm. The others nodded. They were all in one plan. The next day, after the final school bell rang, Mrs. Koi Koi left the school. Her red shoes was making the familiar koi koi sound as she walked down the lonely road leading to her house. But she didn't know she was being followed. The group of students crept behind her, hiding behind the trees and bushes. When they were sure no one was watching, they jumped out and surrounded her. "What do you think you are doing?" Mrs. Koi Koi screamed. But the students didn't listen. They were filled with anger, remembering all the times she had bullied them. They grabbed stick and stone and started hitting her. Mrs. Koi Koi tried to fight back, but there were too many of them. As they kept hitting her, she slipped, fell, and hit her head hard on the ground. Everything went quiet. Mrs. Koi Koi wasn't moving anymore. She wasn't breathing. The students were terrified. "What have we done?" one of them whispered, his voice shaking with fear. She is dead," another said, stepping back. "We can't let anyone find out," the leader of the group said quietly. "We have to bury her now." Shaking with fears, they dug a shallow grave near the bushes and buried Mrs. Koi Koi. They covered the death and ran back to school, pretending like nothing happened. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. No one heard or see Mrs. Koi Koi. The students and the staff of the school were worried that they have not seen Mrs. Koi Koi. The students thought they had gotten away with it, but strange things began to happen. One night during prep time, the students were reading quietly when they heard a fainting noise. Koi, koi, koi. It sounded like someone was walking down the alleyway with shoes that made the same noise as Mrs. Koi Koi's red shoes. The students looked at each other, their hearts pounding in fear. "Did you hear that?" one of them whispered. "Koi, koi, koi, koi." The sound grew louder, coming closer and closer. The students grabbed their books and ran out of the classroom, screaming. From that night on, the sound of koi koi haunted the school. During the night, the students will hear the noise outside their dormitory. When they were washing clothes on Saturdays, they would hear the same sound behind them. They would rush to look, but no one was there. But the sound of Mrs. Koi Koi's shoes never stopped. Koi, Koi, Koi. The whole school was now scared. No one could sleep peacefully and no one dared to walk alone at night. It seems like Mrs. Koiko has come back to haunt them. One day, the principal called an emergency meeting. Something strange is happening in this school, he said. Does anyone knows what is going on? The students stayed quiet, but the principal wasn't fooled. He ordered an investigation, and soon the truth came out. The student who killed and buried Mrs. Koi Koi confessed everything. They told the principal how they attacked her and buried her in the bushes. The principal was shocked and angry, but he knew what had to be done. He called the police and they dug up Mrs. Koi Koi's body. Her spirit was finally laid to rest, and the haunting stopped. But the students who had done the terrible deed were never the same. They could still hear the koi koi sound in their dreams, a reminder of the wickedness they had tried to hide. Hi guys, thank you for watching this video to the end. Please, to support me, subscribe to my YouTube channel. It's free of charge. You don't pay for subscribing. Please, it helps me to grow and grow more. Thank you.